It's tough to look at The Evil Within and not make comparisons to Resident Evil 4. On top of similar looking control schemes and visuals, both games are even directed by the same person, Shinji Mikami. The Evil Within also serves as the flagship title for Mikami's new company, Tango Gameworks, so players would certainly be excused for assuming that The Evil Within is playing it safe by retreading old ground and building upon what made Resident Evil 4 so great. Unfortunately, Mikami's aim isn't as true this time around, and The Evil Within feels confused with what it wants to be.
Sebastian?
Sebastian Castellanos is a detective in Crimson City who's been called in to investigate a local hospital. Upon arriving though, the hospital is littered with bodies, there's a freak with psychic powers who effortlessly murders a group of police officers, and Sebastian is imprisoned by a chainsaw-wielding maniac. Sebastian must now regroup with his fellow detectives and figure out what's going on, all the while fighting off hordes of zombies and monsters. The plot hits the ground running, with plenty of action and mysteries to hook the player right away. The story is also well supported by a variety of great environments, tons of slowly revealed character backstories, and some out-of-nowhere plot twists to keep the player invested. It would have been an easy oversight for the game's locales to end up looking similar, but in this regard, Tango Gameworks executed their goal with flying colors. There's a city streets level, a hospital level, a forest level, ancient catacombs. Even the sewers, a tired cliche for video games, is pulled off so well here.
What is going on here?
The lighting engine goes a long way in pushing the atmosphere as well, thanks to your trusty lantern always by your side. Perhaps more than anything, The Evil Within is an absolute joy to watch. As a video game though, The Evil Within really needs to be a joy to play, and here's where things start to look ugly. Players who start off anew to The Evil Within would be rightfully forgiven in assuming that it's actually a stealth-focused game, as the first couple of hours consist of purely sneaking around with nothing to defend yourself with. Even when the player is finally given their first gun, zombies still take multiple rounds to put down and ammo is frighteningly scarce, which does help push the stealth approach even more so. This isn't a bad idea at all, as stealth gameplay has its roots in slow and nervous excitement, which lends itself well to the horror genre. At the least, it certainly harkens to the old school rules of horror, where avoiding combat is often encouraged more than getting kills. It is a shame then that the stealth mechanics aren't strong enough to carry the game throughout, mainly because it falls flat too often. At the most random times, the stealth approach will switch from being laughably easy to frustratingly difficult. It's an all too common occurrence to follow behind an enemy for a while, only to be caught by a sideways glance and having to restart the area all over again because the player becomes swarmed with enemies. And once Sebastian finally manages to make it through an area without a single hiccup, the game's finicky controls work against the player as a minor button slip leads to an instant death. Having patience and studying enemy patrols are hallmarks of the stealth genre, but so are consistency and reliability. It's never fun when a great 20-minute run comes to a screeching halt because something random or unfair suddenly pops up. It doesn't seem to matter much anyway, because about 7 hours in, The Evil Within practically drops the stealth approach altogether and begins drowning the player in ammo and supplies. And since this is a modern shooter, Sebastian will automatically regenerate his health up to a certain point, which makes healing items lose a lot of their utility and negates some supply management, which could have gone a long way to emphasizing the horror atmosphere. While The Evil Within starts as a tense and uncomfortable stealth horror game, it slowly transforms into a typical third-person shooter with only a slower fire rate and a little less ammo to set itself apart from the crowd. Of course, too much firepower isn't necessarily a negative point. Resident Evil 4 from about 9 years earlier ran with this idea and did very well for itself. The difference is that Resident Evil 4's slow speed, both in movement and fire rate, was aided by its precise aiming system. Not only did every shot have to count, but it was largely up to the player's skill to make sure that bullets weren't wasted. The Evil Within, on the other hand, uses the typical crosshair found in many shooting games that is meant to regard for accuracy and recoil. But in practice, it's more akin to a random chance, so you can still miss even if your target is right in the center of your crosshairs. While these other shooter games expect the player to miss a lot and make up for it with greater speed, the slow pace of The Evil Within makes missing even a single shot turn into a grand annoyance. Even throwing a grenade can be an ordeal. If it does any damage at all. In an attempt to compensate, The Evil Within does provide the player with plenty of ammo, but this ruins the horror mood and it does nothing for the already stilted pacing of the combat. The main weakness of The Evil Within is in refusing to focus on only a few strengths and instead tries to do a little of everything. The game needs to be slow because it's horror themed, but there needs to be a lot of action too. Make stealth a powerful option that can easily fall apart, but give the player plenty of weaponry to fall back on if shit hits the fan. It's a shame that the developers couldn't pick a single direction because there's a lot of potential here. To really emphasize my point, I want to reiterate that the game starts off as a pure stealth game with no weapons. By the end of the game, you're mounting a heavy machine gun turret and mowing down mobs of zombies. These two scenes seem like they're from two completely different games. Worse yet, the game tends to be misleading at times in its direction and objectives too. Using the turret section as an example, Sebastian's fellow detective asks him to go to her after killing a ton of zombies.
Please hurry.
Yet doing so suddenly prompts another wave of zombies to appear and swarm the player.
Keep them off me!
The exit does not open and all the zombies need to be eliminated before proceeding. I figured that it must have been a minor glitch of sorts, or perhaps I misinterpreted the game. But no, it's clear as day.
Please hurry. Come on. Sebastian.
The player is meant to jump off the turret, then run back to the turret and kill more zombies, and then you can proceed. But anyone who's new to this section will very likely die or waste a ton of ammo for no good reason. It's an awful beginner's trap that makes no sense whatsoever other than to unfairly handicap the player, and it's never fun when it feels like the game is trying to cheat you. The Evil Within certainly has its moments though. Most of the bosses are pretty creative, they're a lot of fun to fight, and the game usually doesn't resort to mechanics made just for that specific boss. The level design is consistently great and offers a lot of exploration as well as large arenas to do battle against tons of enemies. Even the puzzles aren't half bad, and the upgrade system does a great job at allowing the player to customize Sebastian to their playstyle, without offering obvious paths that may be more overpowered than others. For every great aspect to The Evil Within though, there seem to be 2 or 3 things that hamper the experience as a whole. The Evil Within simply fails on too many fronts by trying to do a little of everything, and the whole game feels unbalanced and quickly turns into a chore to play through. I can only recommend The Evil Within to those who are more forgiving and less nitpicky of gameplay flaws, since the story and atmosphere throughout the game are top notch, and there's plenty of replay value in the form of New Game Plus and unlockable difficulty levels. As far as the gameplay goes, other games have managed a similar style but with far more success, such as Resident Evil 4 or Dead Space. I feel as though even the classic Resident Evil fans, for whom this was no doubt made for, will find The Evil Within to be pretty disappointing, but the foundation is certainly strong enough to build upon for a better sequel. Thanks for watching my review of The Evil Within. If you enjoyed this video, hit the like button, and if you'd like to see more, subscribe.